I love the company, but as you know, they announced a few days ago that they're going to move a lot of their manufacturing business to Mexico. I'm just notifying John Deere right now. If you do that, we're putting a 200% tariff on everything you want to sell in the United States. With that said, I had a conversation last week with Secretary Lutnick and told him how we feel. It's going to hurt Americans, it's going to hurt American jobs, and it's going to hurt investments. We've seen the market drop, and I'm sure it will start falling again. It was supposed to be Trump's moment of success, the point at which he convinced America's biggest companies to bring jobs back. But instead, John Deere and Ford surprised him. What began as a campaign to revive U.S. manufacturing turned into a major economic conflict when two of the country's most iconic brands went against the president. John Deere, known as a symbol of rural America, quietly announced its plans to move production abroad. And just as Trump thought he could pressure them into changing course, Ford, a proud symbol of Detroit, made similar moves, cutting domestic investments and expanding operations internationally. Trump called it a betrayal. He threatened tariffs, promised consequences, and warned that no American brand would avoid action. But Deere and Ford didn't back down. Their response wasn't loud, it was strategic and effective. Now, the real questions are, why did two of America's most patriotic companies go against Trump? How did his strategy backfire? And who is paying the price as the auto and farming sectors face instability? When Trump spoke at a crowded rally in Des Moines, Iowa, the audience expected his usual messages about border security and economic policy. What they didn't expect was the strong economic threat he was about to announce. In front of tens of thousands of supporters, Trump declared a 200% tariff on all John Deere products made outside the U.S. and a 25% general tariff on all imported Ford vehicles and parts. This wasn't a warning or negotiation, it was a firm stance. Trump described the tariffs as a defense of American workers, saying, "If these companies want to sell to American workers, they will build in America, or they will pay the price." The crowd responded with loud applause. But behind the political show, business leaders and economists were surprised. No American president had ever proposed tariffs this large on U.S.-based companies. The economic impact was immediate. Analysts estimated the tariffs would raise the average price of Ford vehicles by $10,000. John Deere's equipment could become 20% to 30% more expensive, pushing farmers to pay much more for essential machinery. Wall Street reacted quickly, Ford's stock dropped, and Deere's market value fell by over $10 billion in just 1 week. But beyond financial markets, the deeper impact was political. Trump's tariffs weren't just aimed at two companies, they affected the entire American supply chain. Auto factories, farm equipment dealers, and parts suppliers across the Midwest began preparing for the consequences. The people affected most weren't CEOs or political figures, they were American workers, farmers, and families in small towns. As prices rose and media coverage intensified, one group felt the consequences more than anyone: the people Trump had promised to protect, and this is just the beginning. The deeper this situation goes, the clearer it becomes how quickly things escalated. You want to stay informed and understand what's happening every time news like this breaks. Make sure to follow closely, more developments are coming. Farmers and factory workers are caught in the middle. In towns across Iowa, Michigan, and Wisconsin, the atmosphere was tense. For years, Trump's supporters believed in his promise to bring back manufacturing and protect rural America from corporate decisions and global trends. But now, as John Deere and Ford held their positions and Trump responded forcefully, his supporters found themselves in a difficult situation. For farmers, it was personal. Many had used John Deere tractors and harvesters for generations. Their farms depended on Deere's equipment, financing, and repair services. But now, those machines were about to become much more expensive due to the tariffs. Some farmers began to question whether they could afford to upgrade or replace old equipment under these new costs. Factory workers in Michigan and Ohio had different concerns. Trump's tariffs were meant to target Ford's production abroad, but the effects threatened domestic jobs, too. The supply chains were so interconnected that even vehicles made in the U.S. used parts from Mexico. As tariffs with Brazil and Canada loomed, Ford warned of potential layoffs and plant closures. not because of foreign competition, but due to Trump's economic policies. What started as a patriotic push for American manufacturing quickly became much more complex. Families who had once cheered at Trump's rallies were now dealing with rising prices, job insecurity, and increasing frustration toward the corporations they had trusted for decades. Political lines began to blur. Conversations at kitchen tables turned tense. The very voters Trump relied on started to question whether the economic battle was worth its cost. Just when rural communities thought things couldn't get worse, the backlash intensified beyond expectations. But the boycott was only the start of something larger. How Trump's base turned on John Deere. This boycott wasn't just a political gesture, it was a full-scale rebellion in Trump's own territory. When Trump took the stage in Iowa and accused John Deere of betraying American farmers, his message was clear. He claimed Deere had abandoned them by moving manufacturing to Mexico and India. Then he told supporters what to do: stop buying Deere. The crowd responded loudly, the message spread quickly, and in just days, the boycott against America's most iconic farming brand surged through rural towns. At first, the idea of farmers boycotting John Deere seemed unlikely. For generations, Deere's green and yellow machines had been a foundation of American agriculture. But families who had long depended on Deere were now faced with a difficult decision: stand with Trump or stand with Deere. Many chose Trump. Across the Midwest and South, farmers began canceling orders. Dealerships saw a sharp drop in foot traffic. Online groups supporting the boycott grew rapidly. Facebook pages, local radio shows, and farm supply stores became places for heated debates about loyalty, betrayal, and the future of American industry. This wasn't just online chatter. Real-world effects came fast. Small-town dealerships experienced a slump in sales. Local mechanics who specialized in Deere equipment saw their schedules clear out. Farmers who had always relied on Deere started considering Case IH, Kubota, and New Holland. The boycott extended beyond machinery. People stopped buying Deere hats, shirts, and merchandise. Sales collapsed. What began as a political statement had become an economic tool, used by the very people Deere had served for over a century, and the pushback didn't stop there. Supporters of Trump organized parades featuring only non-Deere tractors. Videos of people spray painting over the Deere logo went viral. Rural radio shows aired daily segments encouraging people to buy American and protest what they saw as Deere's betrayal. The irony was that many of the alternatives, like Kubota and Mahindra, were also foreign-owned and made outside the U.S. But the boycott wasn't driven by logic, it was about loyalty, identity, and political response. As the boycott gained momentum, John Deere's leadership came under pressure. Dealerships demanded explanations. Rural mayors worried about local economies. Inside Deere's headquarters, executives began to realize how personal the issue had become. They had expected global economics to outweigh political noise. Instead, they faced a major threat from their own customers, but the disruption wasn't limited to farms and small towns. What happened next shook the heart of American finance. Wall Street, while farmers abandoned Deere, financial markets reacted strongly. When Trump announced a 200% tariff on Deere products made abroad, the market response was immediate. Deere's stock didn't just decline, it plummeted. By the end of the week, Deere's share price had dropped by over 22%, wiping out billions in value. Ford's stock also fell after the announcement of a 25% tariff on imported vehicles and auto parts. Wall Street wasn't focused on politics or nationalism. It cared about profits, growth, and stability, and Trump's economic strategy threatened all three. Analysts on CNBC and Bloomberg warned that the tariffs could cause a downturn in the manufacturing sector. Hedge funds started selling shares. Mutual fund managers received worried calls from investors. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell by over 600 points in a single day. Inside corporate boardrooms, the mood was even worse. Executives scrambled to calm investors, holding emergency meetings and hastily arranged press conferences. Ford's leadership team convened late-night strategy sessions, trying to model the long-term damage. Emails flew back and forth between CEOs, trade associations, and government officials. Everyone wanted to know the same thing: how far was Trump willing to go? The answer became painfully clear when Trump doubled down at another rally, declaring that any American company that moved jobs overseas would face the same punishment. Wall Street's worst fears were confirmed. This wasn't just about John Deere or Ford, it was about the entire future of American manufacturing. The panic wasn't limited to stocks. Bonds tied to agricultural and auto companies were downgraded. Pension funds started pulling out of manufacturing-heavy investments. International investors began quietly divesting from U.S. manufacturing stocks, fearing a long-term trade war that would hurt American industry. The political war Trump had launched was now an economic disaster in motion. But the real winners weren't in Washington or Wall Street. They were sitting quietly, watching this collapse unfold, ready to take their shot. While Wall Street was melting down, Deere's rivals were sharpening their knives. How Case IH and Kubota capitalized on chaos. John Deere's misfortune became Case IH's and Kubota's golden opportunity. As the boycott spread and Deere's sales tanked, rival companies wasted no time. They launched aggressive advertising campaigns targeted directly at Trump's rural base. Case IH ran ads on conservative talk radio and rural TV networks, branding themselves as the true American farming partner. Kubota flooded social media with patriotic imagery, subtle digs at Deere's disloyalty, and promotions offering discounts to farmers who traded in their Deere equipment. These brands knew exactly what they were doing. The political tension in rural America wasn't just about tariffs or manufacturing jobs, it was about identity, pride, and feeling abandoned. Case IH and Kubota crafted their messaging carefully, tapping into that outrage without being overtly political. They didn't need to call out Trump supporters, they simply painted themselves as the brand farmers could trust. While Deere floundered in scandal and controversy, the strategy worked. Sales for Case IH and Kubota jumped by double digits in key rural markets within weeks of the boycott's peak. Dealerships reported unprecedented demand. Farmers who had never considered switching brands started walking into showrooms looking for alternatives. Even foreign brands like Mahindra and New Holland saw a surge in interest despite their own overseas production. The goal wasn't just about tractors anymore, it was about sending a message. Ford's competitors also jumped into the fray. General Motors and Stellantis quietly rolled out new incentive programs encouraging customers to trade in their Ford vehicles for American-made alternatives. Foreign automakers like Toyota and Hyundai, unaffected by the auto tariffs thanks to local U.S. production facilities, aggressively marketed their cars as the smart American choice. The collapse of Deere's and Ford's rural market share wasn't a gradual erosion, it was a feeding frenzy. Behind the scenes, corporate executives were already preparing for the next phase of the war, a total reshuffling of the U.S. manufacturing landscape. But the real crisis wasn't just sales and stock prices, it was in the very supply chains that kept America's factories running. The economic consequences of Trump's tariff war didn't stop at the cash register or the stock exchange, they ripped through the arteries of American industry, the supply chains. When Trump's 200% tariffs on John Deere's imported equipment and 25% tariffs on auto parts went into effect, the supply chain crisis that followed was devastating. For decades, American manufacturers had built complex global networks of suppliers, tractor parts, semiconductors, steel components, wiring harnesses, all sourced from around the world. Deere's factories depended on precision parts from Mexico, Germany, and Brazil. Ford's assembly lines relied on thousands of foreign-made components to keep vehicles rolling off the production line. Trump's tariffs didn't just raise prices, they broke these supply chains overnight. Suddenly, key parts were stuck at ports, delayed by paperwork and punitive fees. Suppliers in Mexico and Canada canceled shipments, unsure how to navigate the new tariff landscape. Raw materials became scarce and expensive. Small and mid-sized U.S. suppliers couldn't ramp up production fast enough to fill the gap. Lead times doubled, then tripled. The ripple effects were brutal. Deere factories in Iowa and Illinois were forced to idle shifts and lay off workers.